there is a long list of treaties to which we are notable exceptions and holdouts. The Kyoto Treaty on climate change, the potential Copenhagen Treaty at the end of this year, the International Criminal Court, which the President came into office and didn't just hope the Senate wouldn't ratify, which it certainly wouldn't have, but unsigned it so it doesn't go to the Senate, which is a nice ironic twist if Bush should end up where he belongs, in front of it, as a criminal charged before the International Criminal Court. The Biodiversity Treaty, the Forest Protection Treaty, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the Landmine Ban Treaty, the Cluster Munitions Treaty, the Treaty on Preventing an Arms Race in Outer Space. And there are treaties that, of course, we should end, and some of which the current president promised to work to radically reform, including NAFTA, including the WTO, the IMF, the World Bank, and everybody here should be in Pittsburgh. Should be in Pittsburgh for the G20, the 24th of this month, if I'm not mistaken. 24th.
24th and 25th.
The 24th and 25th, and surrounding days, and all sorts of conferences and things to participate in, including showing the world that we still care. The part of what we need in terms of a different approach to the rest of the world, one of as a nation among equals rather than an empire, is an incredible shift in where we put our resources. And studies are very, very clear that we get more and better jobs when we invest in non-military things, even here. And when we invest $150 billion a year or so in military bases elsewhere around the globe, of course the disparity is much more extreme in terms of the benefit we would get by investing here. 65% of Americans, according to a very good study, want to cut the military budget, want to shift that money to useful things. Congressman Barney Frank earlier this year was a media darling every time he explained why we had to give our grandchildren's money to bankers. He was all over every media outlet. Well, he worked with a number of organizations and with the Institute for Policy Studies to come up with a plan to cut the military budget by 25%, and held a press conference. Not a single corporate media story, not one. The same congressman. When your congressmember replies to you that we have to spend that money because it's for jobs, it's for jobs in your district, there are a number of things you can reply. One is, what are you, a socialist? What are you doing with socialism? Because if this money were for jobs in anything other than killing people, they would be fleeing from it as from the Soviet Union. This is not what your typical congressmember espouses. Secondly, invest the money at home instead of in an empire, and you will have more jobs in your district. And thirdly, many of these weapons do not work. Many are designed to fight the Soviet Union, and many are designed to fight the Japanese fleet. It's craziness. The president, to his unbelievable credit last night, twice mentioned the forbidden fact that wars cost money, and once mentioned the almost forbidden fact that the Bush tax cuts for the extremely rich cost money. He did not mention that he is expanding the wars. He did not mention that he proposed and fought for the largest military budget in the history of the universe earlier this year. He did not mention the banker bailouts that dwarf even military and war spending. But he did mention a little bit the wars and the tax cuts. To his credit, he did not mention the IMF bailouts. He did not mention the big things. And the highest moral stand he took on the issue of health care was to not spend any money. Right? He said, I like the public option. The public option's groovy. I can talk about it. It's a nice thing. Maybe we should kind of do it. Who knows? Maybe we'll do it in 5 years if we have a healthcare crisis or something of that sort. But what I'm going to put my fist down on and draw a line in the sand and swear to take a commitment on is that I will not support it if it costs a dime. Right? This is our highest form of morality, right? To not spend money, except on all of these other things, right? Including these bailouts that Glenn Beck opposed along with us and 95% of Americans. It doesn't get mentioned. And in Iraq too, I have to say, it's the same sort of morality. And I'm obliged to tell you, I think, particularly because Mike advertised this as sort of a stand-up comedy event, that there was an Iraqi the other day who found a lamp and rubbed it. And a genie came out. And the genie said, "What do you want?" And the Iraqi said, "Could you build us a little footbridge that goes to Sweden so I can take my family to Sweden and get out of this hell? Half the people I know have been killed. The other half have fled. Nothing works around here. People are sick and dying and hungry and diseased. Can you just build a little footbridge to Sweden?" And the genie said, "You know, I'm just a beginning genie. That's a little bit above my pay grade. I mean, Sweden's far away. Give me any other wishes?" And then the Iraqi says, could you get the electricity to work in Baghdad?" And the genie says, "What color bridge do you think would go to Sweden?" Because this is our standards for what's important in Iraq and in Afghanistan have nothing to do with improving things, right? We fight people in Afghanistan who are only fighting because they are paid enough to put food in their mouths. That's why they're fighting. And we do nothing to put food in their mouths in any other way. We attack them. A couple of days ago, there was an article by a great reporter for McClatchy, who's done a better job than most on these wars and knows exactly what's wrong with them, who was embedded in Afghanistan. And he's in there with U.S. troops, and they're fighting in an area potentially with civilians. And they're taking fire, and they lose 4 soldiers. And his complaint afterwards is that they wouldn't bring in air power. The U.S. wouldn't bring in air power to protect the U.S. troops, who by his own account are there for no real understood reason. Where the alternative, of course, is to not have the ground troops and not need the air power. In this book, in the next chapter, I take a look at specifically where we're spending money. And some of these numbers are estimates. They are based on reports and studies that are detailed in the book and in the footnotes. But I lay out where some money is wasted and where some money could go. And in the category that I call taxes for tyranny, we have warrantless spying, $55 billion. Use of the military domestically, $26 billion. I'm sorry, $2 billion. Detention, rendition, and torture, etc., $10 billion. Illegal propaganda, $500 million. In entitlements for our empire, for bases overseas, 100 to 150 billion, call it 100. Wars, 162 billion. Non-defensive weapons and military, 69.6 billion. Weapon gifts to other nations, 4 billion. In welfare for the wealthy, Paulson's plunder, 8.4 trillion with a T. Non-taxing of corporations, 500 billion. Bush's tax cuts for the super rich, mentioned by our president last night, 100 billion. Social Security capped at $97,500 and not taken for any income above that, 120 billion. Non-taxing of financial transactions and investment income and estates, 500 billion. Non-restoration of progressive taxation of the wealthy, 500 billion. We're looking at about $10.5 trillion, give or take. We could pay off our debt. We could fund diplomacy. We could provide foreign aid. We could create green jobs. We could provide housing. We could provide education. We could provide health care. And we could treat these things as rights, not as optional provisions, but as rights that are required. And money should not be an issue. because we would have money left over. And on health care, we don't have to even think about it in those terms. Because on health care, we already spend more than we have to be spending. So these should be thought of as rights. Our Constitution was groundbreaking. It was a very forward-looking document a very long time ago. And the people who put it together thought we would amend it very frequently. And we've barely touched it. And there are constitutions far out ahead of ours. Right? Ecuador now gives the environment rights. Not people environmental rights, but gives the environment rights. Which, you know, that's crazy. The environment's not a human being. That's not in the Bible. But we give corporations rights. And there is no reason we can't give rights where we want to give rights in the way that we want to give them. And you look at the ones we've been supposed to have. Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, habeas corpus. Not taken away just by Bush and Cheney, but taken away now by President Obama, who's formally establishing preventive detention. Section 10, the right against ex post facto laws. Right? You can't make something a crime after it's already occurred. Yet we now routinely make something not a crime after it's occurred. We give retroactive immunity to people and corporations. We ought to explicitly ban that. You look at the Military Commissions Act, the FISA Amendments Act, etc. The First Amendment, Bush used more agencies than I can list to promote religion. We do not have meaningful freedom of the press. We have Pentagon pundits who are paid to act as puppets for the Pentagon, and yet whose views blend in perfectly, and nobody notices, because we do not have meaningful freedom of the press. We don't have freedom of speech. We have independent journalists preventively detained at places like the Republican National Convention and the Democratic. We don't have meaningful freedom of assembly. You know, we have these cages. We don't have freedom to assemble in the workplace. We should be passing the Employee Free Choice Act, right? There is no excuse for not throwing out the filibuster rule tomorrow with 51 senators, passing the Employee Free Choice Act the next day, and passing single-payer health care next year with a labor movement to push it through. There is no excuse. The filibuster, too, is not in the Constitution, not anywhere in the Bible. It's not a law. It's a rule that 51 senators can throw out tomorrow. There was a Department of Justice memo, October 23rd, 2001, that said any president can throw out First Amendment protections and Fourth Amendment protections, right? And you go through the Bill of Rights, and if you want, we can discuss each one. And it's not that they were perfectly intact 9 years ago, but they have been severely damaged, if not eliminated. The only possible exception is the Third Amendment. Do you recall what the Third Amendment is? You cannot be required to quarter troops in your home. Well, this was at a time when we weren't supposed to have a standing army. Congress, not the president, Congress was supposed to decide that there was a need to raise and fund an army and to oversee and regulate and handle what that army would be and not fund its existence for any more than 2 years and so on. Well, we have a standing army, and not just here, in countries around the world, and they have no need of being quartered in our houses. We fund houses for them permanently. So it's a different world, and they had no need to shred that particular amendment, or they would have found a way. I go in further into rights that we haven't had. In some cases that we think we've had, but that we really need. And first among those is the right to vote. We do not have the individual right to vote. We have the right against particular forms of discrimination in voting. But an individual national right to vote would allow a national system of election standards, verifiable voting, universal registration. There is no excuse for people not to simply be registered to vote when they turn 18. If we can have Social Security, we can have voting. And then we can do away with all of this, what we think of as activism, but is actually busy work of registering people to vote. we can maybe then focus on where activism needs to be, which is primarily in between elections, not focused on elections, of which we expect far too much and then are far too disappointed when we don't get it. We need not just the right to vote, but the right to be a candidate, which, because of most people's financial situation and the financial requirements of being a candidate, we are for the most part deprived of. And having that right would facilitate all kinds of reforms. We need to restore and improve all of the sort of Magna Carta rights that we've lost or never had. We need the presumption of innocence. We need the right to be told the charges. We need the right not to be detained without a charge. We need the right to obtain and use video of all interrogations and confessions. We need the right of the accused to be separated from the convicted. We need the right of juveniles to be separated from adults and not treated as adults. We need the right to compensation for false conviction. We need rights of equality. We need equal rights for everyone. We need equal pay for women as for men, which we are working on. We need rights for children, that their rights are treated first in decisions that involve them. We need rights for parents, parental leave and pay. We could even call it something like family values, which would be actually valuable. We need the right to education, the right to housing, the right to health care as a human right. Can you imagine if the leadership and therefore the followers, we can talk about the corruption of party influence, but if the Democratic Party early this year had come out demanding single-payer health care as a human right, right? Expanding Medicare to cover everybody. You can't invent death panels because Medicare is already there on the books and everybody knows what it is. The bill is short and simple and everybody can read it, and people are motivated and energized around a demand for a human right. Here we have this wonkish campaign for a public option with a trigger or whatever, and we still have people in huge numbers going to jail for single payer. What if there were a movement for single payer that some of our representatives in government were involved in? And then we compromised from there as needed, so that someone like Max Baucus, who months ago supported single payer, supported a public option, would now be pleading for a public option rather than single payer, as opposed to caving and stepping back from a position in which the Democrats had self-censored and pre-compromised before demanding the least thing they would settle for, which had nothing to do with a moral issue of human rights. We need workers' rights, without which we are so incapacitated as activists. And we need, I would argue, basic welfare. We need a basic income guarantee, or we need a maximum wage. We need something to end this incredible disparity, not just of wealth, but of power in our country. A maximum wage set at 10 or 20 times the minimum wage. So the billionaires want to get richer, they have to raise the minimum wage, and they can do it. We need the right to conscientious objection. We need freedom of the press, but we also need freedom from war propaganda. And we need a right to know our rights and our laws, and to have those laws not written down on secret memos and not applied to certain groups but not others, applied to everyone equally.